Hello everyone. Chat also says hi. I'm streaming on Twitch, Yuri Kastorp, same as on here, and we are gonna do a setup session for the McLaren. And we do this quickly before the next race starts. So we start from Le Mans baseline. And we start with the pressures. The pressures, I don't think I can think of a single scenario in iRacing where you don't want minimum pressures. The whole goal of iRacing is to keep the pressures from going up too much. There is a bit of tire warm-up. If your tires are really cold, then you don't have grip. But the benefit of having them a bit colder or a bit lower pressures when they're hot much outweighs them getting up to temperature. Then normally this wing angle is lot of testing. Between 2 and 10. So this setup was 7.5. I'll save you from it now. We learned this from a week of Le Mans racing. If you want to find out, you either make setups for different wings and compare them, or you look at the top speed of other people and compare it to that. And if the top speed is very close to your top speed on a certain wing, it's most likely that they use this setup. So 3.5 wing is the best here. 2 wing works if you make a specific setup for it. 4.5 wing if you want stability, but there's also a couple different things for stability we can do. 2 wing Giga. Yeah, but Taylor, you are not driving 2 wing, I don't think. I am not buying it, you do the same top speed as me. Then, dampers. You can look a lot into these, or nothing. They don't do that much, they're usually the last thing I look into. I just found that in this car, the dampers are really hard. I think they're hard at least. 40 is minimum, or they're really soft. So I wanted max damping. So I just went 0 and all, easy as that. And this is the thing on iRacing. It's a simulator, but a lot of the times the setup is just the best on one minimum. Like you see here on the tires. Minimum, dampers, minimum. Then the nodes, we can look into this. And we delete this and we put a smiley face here, and then we are done with the setup. Alright, let's race. No. Thanks, Atrak. We don't forget about chassis. Don't worry. The dampers you can fine-tune behavior. I just haven't done it. They're not that important. There is time to be found if you want to look into that. Some people do. I don't enjoy it myself. Then we get to the biggest thing of the setup. There's many things here. So, where should we start? The thing I start with normally is high speed and low speed balance. We'll leave the brakes alone. Look at the springs. Look at the ride height. Now, this is from testing. I just clicked a couple different springs. I found that the lower I go with the spring rate, the faster I go on the straight. And obviously, on Le Mans that's pretty good. So I'll be honest, I didn't test much with different springs. I just went from minimum and tried to make that work. So I just went minimum springs all around, because I was the fastest on the straight. Then we got the bump rubber gap. Bump rubber gap is pretty much the amount of suspension you have until you hit the bump stop. And the bump stop is a big rubber where you can limit it and you can help high-speed behavior of the car. For example, if you want to stop a car from leaning over, you put a rubber here and then it leans on the rubber. And from hitting that rubber, the suspension, it does have suspension, but it's really, really stiff because you're pretty much on the rubber. What I found though on this is that you can see it here. These curbs. Oh, go back. Okay, never mind. But the curbs in the last chicane, they're high as fuck. And if I went down on the rubber gap, I could not just jump over the curbs. It had benefits in different places. You can control the right height into corners. So I'm sure at other tracks it works. For me here, I could not get it to work without sacrificing the last chicane, so I just have them on max. Front right height, another thing where the lower you put the car, the faster you go, the more downforce you have. Always want to have this on 50. Pretty much everything. Like backers, I think it's like backers, yeah, but backers I think are a bit harder rubbers. But the bump rubber gap is the suspension range you have, as far as I understand. Yeah, you also have the lights, endurance lights. You also want endurance lights, of course. And you want the purple one, it makes you faster. It confuses the game into making you purple sectors. So on the rear, on iRacing is understeer sim. The front never has enough grip. So you basically want to take away grip from the rear and have the rear like a shopping trolley, just blindly follow in the front. So the toe in on the rear, it makes your rear more stable. We don't want that. We don't want scrub. Always want to have the toe in on the minimum. I can't really think of a point where you don't want this on the minimum. Then we cover the right height. The right height is pretty much how much rear wing you have. Sorry, how much front wing. The rear wing is this. The front wing pretty much, it's not exactly, but the higher you go on the rear right height, the more front downforce you have. The more forwards your downforce, what is it? The point where it works will be. So the higher I go on this, the more front wing I have. The lower I go on this, the lower front wing I have. So, of course, if we go lower on the rear right height or the rear wing, we also need to go lower on this. But iRacing cooked as a very understeery setup, so from testing I found that around this right height is actually pretty good, not for 7 wing, but even 3 wing. Even on Nords. Unless you get damage on the front right height. Unless you, if you get damage on the front right height, then you want to move it up a bit, and even then sometimes it's better to get damage. Then we covered all of these except for the camber. The camber is pretty much how much grip you have on high speed. The more camber you have, the more grip you have at high speed, but the less grip you have on acceleration, on low speed and straight line out of corners. Yeah, the Nords is limited to 70, but you also want that just on the minimum. So on tracks with a lot of corners, you want to have this really high. On tracks like this with a lot of straights, with lots of accelerations, you want to have this a bit lower. And what's a bit lower? I think the range in general is, it depends a bit per car. So this is on maximum. The range is maybe minus 2.5 to minus 3.5. So maybe in Daytona you want to run 2.5. Here we want to run a bit lower. So lower. And iRacing is a LARP sim. It wants you to think that you're working on an actual car. So if you change one number, the rest changes as well, and you have to adjust it again. And it's annoying. So we put it something like this. Let's see, 2.8. Because we're on mostly straight lines, but still want to have a bit of rear grip in the Porsche curves. So the rear looks okay. And how you get to this yourself, the only thing you need to get to is the things that I found was what this ride height is, and this is you find by testing when you have a good balanced high speed, and what the spring rate is, and I just picked softest because the car was the fastest on the straight, and you'll see later, a big issue on this track is traction out of corners. So I want good traction out of corners. And if you go lower on the rear spring, the car gets compressed a bit more on exits, more weight on the rears and more grip. Front camber, pretty much always max. -4. I don't think I can think of a single scenario where the front camber is not maxed. It's one of these default things. So normally you change the ride height, yes. But because iRacing makes setups that are super understeery, I don't change it. I'm not doing my exact race setup because it was based on another set. How do you change the nose weight? It's just the ride heights. Just the ride heights and the springs. So we got this and this and this now. The only issue we have, if we have a big bump rubber gap, we don't have bump stops and the front can compress a lot. And if the front compresses, gets really low, it can either stall the air going under the car and have a swap, or just have a lot of front downforce. So our entry into Indianapolis is going to suffer a bit. I have the same thing on my race setup here. Setups is mostly compromise, and I can choose between a nice entry into Indianapolis and bad curb behavior, or good curb behavior and struggles on corner entry in Indianapolis. And the reason about Indianapolis is that you're into the corner, either brake or off throttle, so the weight is already at the front. And you go into a hole, and then you go up a bit, and once you go up, the front gets loaded before the rear. And if you run a soft front and there's no bump rubber gap, the front wheels get compressed a lot. Front goes really low, and you don't control it with any bump rubbers, so the rear starts slapping. Right. So that's pretty much the front sorted as well. At least in this. Then we get to fronto. Fronto is a bit more difficult. It changes the turn-in and how much the wheels scrub. And pretty much the reaction when you start turning the wheel. The thing is, I don't feel much on iRacing's fronto. I don't feel much, and all I did here was I just put it down to 2. Just because I didn't want to have it that high on a track with mostly straights, because it's basically how your wheels are pointed, either outwards or inwards. And the front are pointed outwards a bit. Then what do we have left? Throttle shaping, it's just personal preference. ABS, TC. I think it's also testing what you like the best. I normally don't really change these too much. I think on streams you can see what people are using as well. I think people are using mostly between like 5 and 7. The rear bump rubber is a bit like the same. It does the same as the front, but it isn't that impactful. Yeah, I do the rake just by driving and seeing what the car handles high speed. And you can also play with the ride heights in high speed when the car is loaded with the bump rubbers. And you can change those. And if you change the bump rubber, for example, for the front to have very low play, you can change how the car rolls in corners, in high-speed corners, and control the rears jumping out that way. And it definitely helps in some cars, in the Porsche cars here, for example, to run lower wing and play with the bump rubber gaps. For me at least, I haven't had to do that in the McLaren. It's pretty stable when I run it like this. And stable in quotation marks because high speed you can't get the car super stable without being super slow in this. What do I change between race and queue setup? Nothing, I literally just take the fuel out. Maybe there is a bit to game because here you start on cold tires, but it's almost nothing. Then we have the brakes, and the brakes are mostly preference. And I say mostly because you want to make sure that you can brake 100%, and you kind of want to have it that you have nice trail braking, so the car doesn't snap on the front or the rear when you're trailing off the brakes into corners. And you want it so that when you're braking 100%, you're braking too much. Or exactly right. Exactly right is the best case. But usually you don't get that exactly right, and you want to make sure that you're using all the available brake. So if you run super low brake cylinders and you're braking 100% and you're still not much in the ABS or not in the ABS at all, you're leaving braking performance on the table. Normally when I use a setup shop, I never change the brakes. Unless I just don't stop in the corners, and my preference is to brake a bit less, then I make these lower. Minrid50 with the sub, thank you. Forever immortalized on YouTube. And then we get to the low speed balance. ARP, which is anti-roll bars. And what the anti-roll bars do is the balance between those. So the difference between the front and the rear is how much over or understeer you have. The more the difference is, so the more the front is higher, the more understeer you have. The more the rear is higher, the more oversteer you have. So finding that balance, for example, I want to run 5 difference, I don't know, like this, is not that difficult. You just focus on the lowest speed corners. And if you find that balance, then you know the difference should be 5. There's a small asterisk in this, in that the steps from 0 to 8, because they simulate holes in an anti-roll bar, it doesn't mean that 6 is the same bit stiffer to 7, from 6 to 7, and 7 to 8. And even in some cars, 5 might be softer than 6, but more than 7. Because again, it simulates holes on the roll bar. And for example, the Porsche Cup. In the Porsche Cup, position 6 is the most, more than position 7. And the way to find that out, I think, usually is in the notes. And there's a bunch of stuff here that you can read. In most cars, it just says when you click on this. Also in the notes here, it says when adjusting the rear angle, following adjustments should be made. So if you want to change the rear wing, +1, it says +5 millimeters, 4.5, which I think is very, very extreme, but that's what they say. So the stuff, what they say here, most of the time makes sense. When you hover over this, it also says at the bottom, stiffer is stiffer effective anti-roll bar. 1 is the softest setting. Sometimes also 8 is a softest setting, so you need to read what it says on the bottom. The same will be for the ABS and the TC. 12 has the most support. I think in the Mercedes, for example, 12 is the least support. So you have 2 to 7 is for slicks on the dry track. So we use 5. Same for TC here. 2 to 7, and we use 4. As someone also said in chat, 2 and 2 is not the same as 7 and 7. And that's where it's tricky with the ARBs to find the right position. Because again, because the jumps aren't the same, so from 2 to 3 on the front might be different from 2 to 3 to the rear. Having a balance of 3-3 might be different than a balance of 6-6. all it says usually is that from 5 to 6 is it gets stiffer. So there's quite a lot of testing involved in how to do it. What I did this week was I struggled with traction. In the race, I struggled with traction a lot. So I wanted to make sure, first of all, that out of corners I could press the throttle and the car does not snap. So what I did, I already had the rear the softest. I had the bump rubber gap the highest, so there's most play that the rear can like sag and go down. I already had camber fairly low on the range that I normally want to use. There's the ARB. So I went low on the rear ARB. I just left the front ARB alone and I went low on the rear ARB. I just focused everything on traction and then figure about the rest later. And the last thing about traction, the differential. And what I normally want to do in the diff is when I'm going a corner and it's barely flat out. It's barely flat out. For example, what's a good corner to test this? Suzuka, out of sector 1, there's a left-hander that keeps going. What I want there is that the rear almost steps out, but not quite. So it wants to rotate, but not over-rotate. On this track, what I look for is on the exits of the chicanes that the rear almost steps out, wants to rotate, but not over-rotate. So what I found having that is that even bringing this lower, we should probably say the lower you go in this, the more the car goes straight on power. But also, the more the car can snap on entries. So as you can see, we already went higher on this to have entry snaps. If we go lower on this, we're going to even have more entry snaps. But I went lower on this. The friction plates here is basically a multiplier of this. Tinfoil head stuff. What it says here, 8 has 2 times the locking force of 4. So if you would go from 12 to 6 and 6, 80, it should be the same. But I think 6 and 80 feels different than 12 and 40. It just feels like that to me. I'm not sure if it's that way, but it is that way for my feeling. That means a bit more testing always. But it's a good rule of thumb what to use, and you don't want to have this super low. So what I did here is I went 6, which is the lowest, and this one I'm pretty low still as well, I think. I didn't go up much. I didn't go to 80. Let's put this at 60. And the last thing, the stack. You want to look. I thought there was a Lamar stack, there wasn't, so we're using FIA stack then. And when we look at the setup now is quite a lot on how I have it in the race. So why don't we try it? The dampers is like a whole different class. Basically what you want to have is you want to have a combination of two things. When you open telemetry, which I won't do now, you want to have a certain distribution. You want to have the plot look like a normal distribution. And what exactly the percentages are, you can look up. I don't remember exactly. I think it's like 15% of the graph you want to be in this side, and then 50% of the time you want to spend in the middle, this, however. I don't remember exactly. Basically, you want to have a graph that looks nice, normal distribution. If you don't have that, if you spend too much time on the side, that means that springs go up and down too much, your dampers are too soft. If you're spending too much time in the middle, means that they're too hard. So you want to find the balance with that. But also, there's also feeling marks. So you can have this perfect graph in there, but you want to have the car feel good. And you can adjust how the weight transfers on different points in the corner. So when we go into a corner, you brake, the weight goes to the front, and you can control how fast it goes to the front with the dampers. And you can control it with the low speed dampers. So compression is how much you want damping when the spring goes in. Rebound is how much you want damping when the spring goes out. And the same goes for the high speed, which is mostly on curbs or really fast movements. Again, sometimes on iRacing, there's lots of time in dampers. You can fine-tune exactly what the car does out of corners. I haven't really done much of that. There's people that do it, but you want to have a combination of both. In some cars, like I think this car, the dampers are just too soft, which means that the spring the whole time goes like this, so we just have maximum values. Yeah, I think it's pretty rare that you don't run either maximum or minimum. And I think on a lot of setup shops you also see this, where most of the time the range iRacing gives you is too tight, so you're either here or here. For example, this is the whole range. Wait. You have the whole range like this. The best you want to do is here, but iRacing only gives you this bit here, so you always want to be here. That's basically, and if iRacing gave you this whole range, dampers would be a lot harder. Because if we then run 0 clicks on everything, then suddenly the car would become like... But luckily, on a lot of iRacing things, the same with the tires. If they make sure that we could go to 0 on this, we would actually have to figure out the pressures. But they don't. The same with the rear toe-in, the same with the front camber. They give us a range, and the optimal value is outside of that range, so it's pretty easy to just go as close to the optimal value as you can. Yeah, the dampers is a combination of both. You want to have theoretically good dampers to have the car handle good in a good range and have optimal grip, but you also want to have a good balance. What tool? Well, VRS is the easiest, but I think it's paid. You can also use Moo and then use Motec. There's also Coach Dave. Coach Dave has a nice launcher that has very nice telemetry. There's a bunch of options. I like the Coach Dave implementation quite a lot lately, but I don't know if they support dampers yet. But now you want to see my setup? Well, this is my setup. This is the setup I made now. So let's see how good the setup is. And as a reference on this weather, I normally run between 53.8 and 54.2 with the setup I worked the whole week on, which is good enough to fight at the front in top split. I think I have the second fastest qualifying time of the week. I think it's a tiny bit off the optimal actual super fast guys. And I don't know if that's setup or driving, it's probably a bit of both. I'll have to get used to the brakes a bit, because the brakes I literally didn't change from the setup I started with, and they were a bit different than what I did. Yeah, for qualifying, all I did this week was the brake bias feels a bit far to the front, and I feel that the car pulls straight, so we go backwards a bit. Qualifying, I just take the fuel out and put the rake exactly where it was. I'll share the setup in Discord as well, yeah. This week it was a bit more than usual. A lot of weeks I just use setup shop. I did a challenge last week where I took the grid and go setup for almost every car. I drove the off-meta cars at Monza the whole week, and the only car I didn't get a podium with in top split was the BMW, where I got 4th in a 5.5k split. And that's all just running setup shop setups. Usually the difference is not more than 1 or 2 tenths. And it comes more down to driver preference. So we have pretty good traction, and that's because of the rears being super soft, and we're running low preload. But it does make it quite tricky on entry. Yeah, like Paul is saying in the chat as well, it's a combination of both. If you just look at feeling, then you don't get the optimal performance out of the car. If you just look at Motec, then you don't have a balanced car every point of the corner, and then you lose time that way. But for some cars, like I know the Porsche, for example, the old Porsche, that was one of the only cars I did actual setup work on. I just looked at the damper histograms, and they told me that the dampers were way too soft. So I just always went to max dampers. And those setups always felt the best. I know some people didn't go max dampers and they went for more of a feeling way. And they got a different feeling out of what the car wants to do, which can also work. But for me, it just worked to always have them max. And try to get it different ways. And that's the thing with setups. Everyone has the same issue. Everyone's faced with the same challenge, and there's a million ways to change it. And one change in the setup always affects the rest. So I think you can put 10 different teams a whole week on a setup, and they will all come up with slightly different results at the end. Right, so here we go. I'll put a reset point to make sure that if I affect the lap, we go back. And apologize for the Sky Q customers on the red button for that foul language. We won't ever do it again. So the rear on entry is a bit loose, but it has nice traction on the corners, which is pretty much the compromise I got to. Don't see long trail braking, depends on the track as well. So the delta I have is from a qualifying lap on a different session. So you can just go to session optimal for now. So as you can see, the rear steps out. Okay, we go back and we cut this out of YouTube. Just put a smiley face and put exactly what was in chat before, okay? Nobody will notice. Okay, so here we start our lap, just after the out lap, of course. We make sure to not fuck up our lap. Apologizes to the Sky Q customers on the red button for that foul language. That's a very original joke I like to make here. The whole chat is happy as well. And the brakes are a bit different than the setup I'm used to. So I won't be as consistent on this yet. And we're running against all-time optimal, which was against a quali lap and much cooler conditions. So we have nice top speed. Try to set up for a good exit here. And as you can see, we have nice section. You can change to session optimal to have something more comparable. And this session is a bit slower in general than this online sessions. But it's a session I'm used to. So it has good comparison on every setup change I make. And again, the lap I'm aiming for is a 53.9. That will be... I think that's my PB after they added drag to the McLaren. With the setup that I've worked on the whole week. So if we get anywhere near that on the first try, I think the setup is pretty good. Holy shit, look at that, Mark. Apologize for that foul language again. It won't happen again. So we'll have this corner here where the front bumps make it a bit tricky, and you can see I have to do a couple of corrections on the wheel, and that's the low preload together with the high front spring range. But again, if you want to change that, then we have to change the setup on different spots again, which is not what I think is good, because hopefully you'll see in the last chicane the setup takes the curbs very well. So let's see a high speed balance here, and we have to be careful with the power because we're running low wing and quite high rake. So rear quite unstable. I'll go maybe a bit lower on the rake in this one. And we're doing 54.1, so about 2/10 of my PB on the first version to setup that we're doing. And I think the lap time here is good enough to pretty much run you up front in the races. So if you enjoyed the guide, make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below, and you can comment who you think the most handsome mouse driver is. So looking forward to that. And yeah, go come say hi on Twitch. I promise the people in chat normally are nicer than they were in this video. Can I get some waves? Do I even have a wave? Tommy has the wave. Right. Ciao, ciao. Whoa, whoa, whoa. This is not how my mods usually are. Let's mod